Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday training. I'm going to give people in about another 5 to 6 minutes to join in, and then we will get started. Please remain muted unless you've got a question, and then I would love to answer your question if you have one. Hello, everyone, and welcome to BK Technologies Tuesday trainings. This training today is going to focus on how to use our RES software to configure radio to go into a trunked network or a trunked system. If you don't have a trunking system or a trunking network, this class really isn't going to work for you. But I would recommend tuning in next week on May the 5th, where we'll be doing a class specifically for conventional network training, and reach out to your RSM or your dealer for the link to that training. So to start off with, let's just go over some very, very basic things, how to use the RES programming software. Let's first talk about how it looks and how we can change the way it looks to suit our preferences. First, we can go under the view and we can select color theme, and we can change the color from this blue dark gray to something else. I've told that the orange and dark gray looks good when presenting, so we'll be using that for this training. Additionally, depending on the font size of your screen, it can be very difficult to read. So we can go into view, we can go to font size, and we can either increase the font or we can decrease the font. We can also hold the control key and we can hit plus or minus. So you'll notice that as we increase the font size, our buttons here on the side will increase. And if you keep increasing, you'll find that we now have to have a scroll bar here at the bottom. So it's best to try to find that happy medium where it's a good size for you to read, and you don't have to spend a lot of time scrolling little scroll bars. So when we have the radio up and we have we have the software up and we have a radio connected to our computer, the first thing we're going to do is turn our radio on. And then we'll see our red light here turn into a green light in about 5 to 6 seconds. There it is. Once we have a green light, we can then read the radio. So now I've successfully read the information off the radio. I know that I'm successful because I can observe the ESN here has changed. If I want to, I can go to File, Save As, and I can save this code plug. Or in the opposite direction, if I want to, if I'm sent a code plug or something along those lines, I can go to File, Open, and I can open a saved code plug that I've been sent. Let me find a good one to show you guys. There we go. And I can open a code plug. Nope, don't want to do that. If I want to, I can also write. So once I have the code plug configured the way I want, I can simply press the write button. It will write to the radio. Once it's written to the radio is going to power down and then restart. So there it's off, it's going to restart, and then we should see that come green again. Great. So when configuring a trunking system, the first thing that we need to do is we need to focus on our trunking keys, our system keys rather. So if we go up to Tools and System Keys, you can see we can load a system key, a software key, or a legacy key. So the legacy key is a legacy file that can be copied and shared very easily. It's not as secure as an advanced system key. Now the advanced system key is comprised of a master key and a child key. The master key's sole purpose and sole job is to make child keys, and then the child key's sole job is to program radios. We can produce a USB child key, or we can produce a software child key. So depending on which one is produced, you would select from here. If you're loading legacy keys, it's going to ask you for the folder in which you store the keys. So you'll notice here under my keys folder, we don't see any key files because that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a folder. I'm sorry, did someone have a question?
Are you going to have it on YouTube where you can watch it later for reviewing?
Yes, this is being recorded and it will be provided to the RSMs to distribute as well.
Thank you.
So once we select the folder here, You'll see here now it's told me that it's got my legacy keys. And as a matter of fact, I happen to have 86 different system keys on my computer. The joys of being a trainer and traveling the country, I guess. Once I've loaded my system keys, I can go back to Tools, System Keys, and then View Current Permissions. From here, it'll open up a window, there it goes, that will show you all of the keys that you have loaded. Because these are all legacy keys, it's just going to show me the system ID and the WACN. But if you have advanced system keys, for example, it will list the parameters that have been put onto that child key, whether it was been limited by unit ID ranges, talk group ID ranges, the number of writes left on the key, or an expiration date of the key as well. So once we've successfully got our system key loaded, it's time to add our system to our code plug. We're going to do this by clicking on the System tab and then selecting +TS. Here I've added my trunking system. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that I have the correct system ID selected. Chances are you're not going to have 86 system keys. You probably are only going to have one. And the one that you have is automatically going to show up here. If you have more than one system that you're programming, when you click this drop down, it'll allow you to select the system ID that you want to select. Once we have our system ID selected, the next step in building a code plug would be to build out the channel ID table, also known as the band plan. This table is pretty straightforward, and if you're in 700, 800, the FCC has done an amazing job of making this table for you. So real quick, we'll do the bandwidth at 12.5. I'm going to do the offset at minus, plus. The transmit offset for 800 is minus 45 and plus 30 for 700. Channel spacing is normally 6.5, no, 6.25, excuse me. For TDMA, where is it? And 12.5 for FDMA. And then your base frequency for 800 is 851.00.625. And for 700, it's normally 762.00625. Your mileage may vary. Again, this is information that's provided by the system. We're just putting it in a place so the radio knows what's going on. If at any reason we fat finger any of these numbers, keep in mind that the control channel of a trunking system is constantly broadcasting the channel identifiers, the control channels, the adjacent site listing, and information like that. The radio has the capability of listening to the control channel, downloading that information, and then using it. So in theory, we don't have to put any of this information in. We can leave all of this blank, and the radio will be able to figure out all of this information on its own. One of the primary reasons we do put this information in, though, however, is if I leave it blank, it could take the radio up to 5 to 6 minutes to affiliate to the system for the first time. But then again, once it's affiliated to the system, it's going to download that information, it's going to remember where it's at, and the next time you turn it on, you're not going to have that issue. And then lastly, we're going to set TDMA and FDMA. Now, you don't have to do this step if you're an FDMA only system, but if you want the radio to operate in TDMA, you do need to make sure that in the band plan, you've identified TDMA channels. After we finish the channel identifier table or band plan, the next step is for us to do control channels. Control channels are pretty straightforward. It's just a receive and transmit frequency. Here I'm going to input a couple. And if you remember, the offset for 700 is plus 30. So the transmit frequency is simply just plus 30 megahertz the receive frequency. Traditionally for VHF, it's plus 10 megahertz. And VHF is the Wild West. Who knows what's going on? And that's when I would really rely on my system administrator or whoever made the system for me to provide that information. So I've only put 3 control channels here, but most likely your system could have quite a few. The important thing to remember here is that the order matters. So if you have a ton of control channels, like more than 50 or so, what's going to happen is as soon as the radio is turned on, it's going to go to this first frequency and see if there's a system there. And then if it's not, it's going to go to the next frequency and on down the line. So if the first frequency we put is a system that is across a site that's across the state that this particular radio is never going to see, it's going to have to go through all that whole list to find one that works. Or if there's we're doing site steering and we're denying sites on denying radios on certain sites, if we put the site that this radio is denied to first, it's going to go there, find the site, then get denied, and then go back to looking for something else. So keep in mind that the order matters, and to optimize the radio's performance, it's recommended that you put the radio's home site first. Whatever site you think that radio is going to be using the most, put it first. I know that you can't always do that, especially if you're trying to standardize a template across maybe a statewide system and you want the order of control channels to be the same across all. It's not the end of the world. The radio will still function and still find the system. But for that initial configuration to optimize, it is recommended that you pay attention to the order. The last thing that we have to configure now is the talk groups. So the talk group listing is pretty straightforward. Let me make this window a little bigger for you guys. We'll add a couple of rows. So here we can add aliases like TAC1, and then we can add IDs. Keep in mind these IDs are in decimal, not hexadecimal. Some manufacturers, they use hexadecimal for the ID, for the trunking ID, and you're gonna need to translate it into decimal if at all possible. It is also possible to have the software show you this information in hexadecimal. And I'll show you that in half a second. If we go up to options, and then we select show unit ID, talk group ID as hex. So now if I go back to my talk groups, you'll see them displayed as hexadecimal instead of decimal. All right. Some other columns here that we see is receive only. So here we can make this talk group receive only. By doing so, the radio is still going to register with the system and still affiliate to that talk group, but we're simply just going to disable the push to talk button on the side of the radio. Prevents the user from talking. The key index number deals with encryption and assigning an encryption key. We'll talk more about that later. And then you have your preferred site listing and your fail-soft information. Most modern trunking systems do what's called fail-soft by personality, where the control channel will send information to the radio to let it know how it should perform during fail-soft. Do you have any questions about basic system configuration? Great. So let's talk about some extras, some add-ons. Let's talk about the unit call here. So if you want to perform unit-to-unit calls, this is where you can enable that. You can have it do response only use the list provided, or have it be unlimited. If your radio is a tier 2 radio without a keypad on the front, you will have to select list only. It won't have a keypad to input the unlimited. And then there are 2 types of unit-to-unit call. You have what we call with availability check, which is most commonly found on Motorola systems. And then you have without availability checks, which is most commonly found on Harris systems. And then you can also configure the encryption. The other good thing about this table is that it can act as a phone book. So instead of displaying these IDs on the front of the radio, because no one understands what these numbers mean, instead of showing these IDs on the number of the on the front of the radio, it will show these names instead. Now, a word of caution about doing this is that if the Chiefs radio is no longer 123, you're going to have to program the entire fleet to update what the new Chiefs radio is going to be. Same with the brush truck. If the brush truck is decommissioned and the radio inside the brush truck is now being used for something else, in order to keep this up to date, you're going to have to reprogram your fleet to match the change. Most commonly, we see dispatch consoles and base stations used here because those are rarely decommissioned. Their IDs hardly ever change. The radios aren't moving or changing roles, and it's a pretty safe bet that whatever you put there, you're not going to have to go back in and edit or change or update. Next is our site aliases. This is not required to make the radio function, but it aids in identifying what site the radio is affiliated to. So if you have a bunch of sites on your system, they'll be listed as, you know, like 1-1 and 1-2, and you're going to have to like memorize what those means. Alternatively, if you put a name here, when you go to display the site that the radio is registered and affiliated to, it'll display the name instead of those numbers. And that's going to help out a great deal. The last big extra that we can talk about here is the data and OTAR. So if you're doing over-the-air rekeying or any kind of data services with the radio, you're going to need to configure this window. So let's talk about just using OTAR, and then we'll move around a little bit. So to enable OTAR, it's very simple. You just click OTAR enable. You would then put in the KMF IP address, and then you would have to update the KMF UDP port and subscriber UDP port if you're using something other than 64414. You're also going to need to select SNDCP registration right here. It's recommended that you also select voice interrupts data. What these allow you to do is it allows you to do a data registration with the system so that there is a pipe to transmit the key. The SNDCP version is number 1, but that's not the most important thing. And then you've got some other registration types and timeout timers. Additionally, we can assign an IP address to the subscriber from here. This only works in systems that allow the radio to dictate what its IP address is, and those are not very common. Text messaging here is where we can allow a central system to send text messaging to the radio. So someone at a CAD can send a text message specifically to the radio, and the radio will receive that. We also have our OTAP, or over-the-air programming, and then if you're using GPS Tier 2 location services, you would use this information here to show where you're sending your GPS information to the central system. Are there any questions about unit IDs, site IDs, or OTAR? Okay, so just to piggyback onto OTAR, let's talk about encryption a little bit. So to configure encryption, first we're going to click on the Global tab, and we're going to click on the Keys button. This opens up the encryption window. The encryption window is broken into 3 main parts. The first part we call the key index table. The next part is called our key list, or non-FIPS keys. And the last part here is our OTAR registration information. So if you are adding keys to the radio, not with a keyloader, but as part of the code plug, so that's not FIPS compliant, but still encrypted, this is where you would do it. Most commonly, we see that with Motorola's ADP encryption, and here we call it RCE, Radio Compatibility Encryption. So here I can assign the key ID and I can assign the key material based on what the key is. Over here is our key index table. This is where we assign an SLN or CKR to a key index. So keep in mind that this number is this number is a decimal number, not a hexadecimal number. Most commonly, you'll see the number 1 here. It's not my favorite. We can assign aliases to help us as humans identify what these numbers mean. It does nothing for the radio and the radio function. But the thing that you need to keep in mind here is that this SLN 123 is assigned to key index number 1. So when we go to assign this key, this is key number 1. If you look down here, our SLN is number 1, but when we go to assign it, we'll assign it as key number 4. So once we've, and lastly, we have our OTAR information. So this is where we would configure the RSI, the KMF RSI, and the MNP to write into the radio. Very simple. Once we have our keys configured, we can go back to the System tab, select the talk groups, and then we can assign our keys. So keep in mind that if I want TAC 1 to use SLN 1, remember that was assigned to key number 4. Even though I've assigned these keys, the radio is still going to transmit clear. We have to change this from clear to secure or selectable. It's recommended that you use secure and strap it to that one setting to avoid users from messing up the configuration of their radio. But if you've got great training programs and you've got great users, they're more than capable of understanding selectable and knowing to turn it on or off. Any questions about encryption or adding encryptions to a talk group? Great. So now that we've got our system configured, let's make it work. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to click on the Zone tab. And here we're looking at our zone setting and what's called Single Channel View. Here I can do a drop down to see all of the different zones, and then I can see all of the different channels in that zone, but I can only see one channel's configuration at a time. This is great if you have a particular position on the channel knob that is not functioning the way that you want it to. So you can go to Single Channel View, you can just focus on that one channel, and you can hunt until you find what went wrong. But more common than not, what we'll see is the multi-channel view. To see multi-channel view, we'll go to View, Channel View Selection, and Multi-Channel View. Now you'll see that it's organized much like a table, and we can see this table and we can see all of the channels in one zone at a time to quickly identify what's going on. To add additional zones, we can press the +Z button. To delete a zone, we can hit the -Z button. If we want to change a zone's name, we can click on Zone Settings, and then under Alias, change that name to something else. If we don't like the order that our zones are in, for example, if we want fire to be first and tactical to be second, we can go to Zone Settings, and under Zone Index, we can update that to reflect our desires. Once we're in the zone that we want to be in, we then need to add channels. So we can add channels a couple of different ways. If we want to add a conventional channel, we can hit plus CC. If we want to add a trunking channel, we can hit plus TC. Or if we want, we can hit plus or minus C here, and then I can select a range to input. So if I want the first 6 positions and channel 16 to be trunking, I can type in 1 through 6, comma 16, select trunking from the drop-down, and then select add. Here you've seen I've got 1 through 6 and then 16. If I then want to fill in the gap, so to speak, with conventional channels, I can hit 7 through 15, make sure it says conventional, and then hit add. You don't have to do this. If you leave this blank, the position knob will just say unprogrammed, the radio will tone, and the user will keep turning until they have something that works. If you notice here, because I have a trunking channel selected, none of the information for the conventional channels show up. Likewise, if I select a conventional channel, none of the information for the trunking channels will show up. So if you go, where did all my information go? Don't worry, it's still there. Just click on the right one. Now to configure the channel. First, we're going to go to talk group, and we're going to select from this drop-down which talk group that we want. You'll notice that when I select the talk group, the label is going to automatically update with whatever label we gave it in the talk group listing. If I want to edit it, I can simply just click on it, and then I can edit it. But if I ever go back and change this, it's going to automatically go back to whatever's in that table. Everyone see how that works? Any questions about how to add zones or channels to configure the radio? A nice pro tip that you can do is if you know the channel ID, because more likely than not, your channel ID table is going to be a lot longer than just these 4 items. So if you know the ID that you want, you can simply just select the column here, or select the cell, and then you can type it in. And then it will automatically go. So if you have a bunch of them, you can just type in as so. So we've got a question asking, does BK support ISSI roaming, and how would that be programmed? So we do support ISSI programming, and it's pretty much programmed from the system tab. Your system key is going to be configured with what we call the wildcard under the system here. And that will allow it to do what's called inter-WACN roaming, so that it roams across just the same WACN, stays the same. And then if you have inter-WACN roaming, which is where the system ID and the WACN don't have to match at all, I believe that's under additional options. You'll have to bear with me. This is a very new feature set that we just recently did. And I think you just keep the coverage type wide area. Yeah. I'll look more into that though, and I'll get back to you. Great question. So let's talk about scanning. You cannot configure your scanning until after we've assigned our talk groups to the channels. So to do that, we simply click on the System tab, we click on Scan Lists, and then we'll click Add Scan List. So here I have one scan list. I can have multiple scan lists if I like. From there, I can click Add Row. I can then select the zone that I want. Here I can only select Zone 2 because Zone 1 has nothing in it. And then I can select the channels that I want. I can have it beep on priority transmit. So if you're on the priority channel, or if the priority channel is active, you'll hear a beep before you hear the radio traffic. The priority type can be programmed where I can set it, or it can be selected to where the user can select it from the radio, or there can be non-priority. Likewise, the talkback type, we can either talk back on the selected channel, so whatever channel we happen to be selected on the radio is the channel we're going to talk back on, or we can do active channel. So if you are scanning and you hear, and just say you're on your private or your tactical channel and you're scanning and dispatch comes over, you'll hear dispatch, and if you key the radio within the scan hold time, you will then transmit back on the dispatch, which happens to be active, instead of on your private channel. And you can adjust the scan hold time here. Once we have the scan list configured the way that we want, we then have to assign it. So we go to zone, we go to the channels that we want to assign, and then under scan list, we select the scan list that we want. Now, it's a good idea to pretty much just set every channel to the same scan list, because that gives your user the capability to edit their scan list on the fly from the radio. And it takes the responsibility of us, the radio techs who program radios, of being mind readers and figuring out what our customers want. The easiest way to do this is once I have that one selected there, I can right click it, I can go to copy parameters, and then I can copy it to all. So now you see every talk group in this zone is set to scan list 1, even if it's not a part of the scan list originally. This will allow the user to edit and add these channels to their scan list as desired. Any questions about scanning? Great. All right, so one of the last things I have for you here is emergency operation. One of the great things that a P25 trunking system affords us is the ability to do dispatching and emergency calls. You can still do that in P25 conventional, but you just don't see it as often. So for an emergency call to happen, you select first to have an emergency call, and now an emergency call will be active. We can give the user the capability to cancel the call if we want. We can have the radio tone if it receives an emergency call. And then we can also have the radio do what's called a hot mic. So if the hot mic is selected, then as soon as the emergency button is pressed, the radio is going to key up on the channel designated for the designated amount of time. Here, the default is 10 seconds. So for 10 seconds, the radio is going to key without any interference from the user. This is great if a user is in a situation where they're under duress but can't necessarily use their radio. Another key feature of the emergency is what's called emergency revert. So to set that up, once we've configured our emergency settings, we can click on zone, and then we can select an emergency group. Let's add one real quick. Let's go to our talk groups here, add a row. So the emergency talk group does have to be added to the talk group listing here, but it does not have to be added to the listing here. We're going to just for fun though, right? So now under where it says emergency group, if I select our emergency talk group, when that emergency button is pressed, they can go straight from the active talk group they're on to the new talk group they've got to see. And again, if we want to assign this parameter to all of the talk groups in our zone, we can right click this, go to copy parameter, and then select to all. Any questions about emergency operation? Okay, so programming a trunked radio can be quite overwhelming, especially when you can get it all configured, you get it set up, you try to get it on the system, and it still doesn't work. And chances are it doesn't work because you don't have the right checkbox checked or whatever have you. So an easy way to find something that you're looking for is to use Control F. So if I hit Control F, And here I have my search parameters. I forgot to turn on OTAR, and I want to turn on OTAR. So here I can just type in OTAR, and then I can look at my listing here, and I can see OTAR enable data registration. Oh, that's conventional. That doesn't count. OTAR key set. No. Let's see if I can find it. OTAR enabled. There it is. P25 trunking. So if I click on this, it's going to instantly take me to the window where I can change that setting and then highlight it for me so that I can see it. It's a nice feature, especially when things are going wrong. So then let's move on to some menus, buttons, and displays. So when doing menu items, keep in mind that you have menu items for conventional menus, conventional programming menus, and trunking main menus. So especially if you're doing a trunking conventional mix, it's a really good idea to make those two configured as congruently as possible so that you don't confuse your users. They don't think, oh, my radio's broken because I changed the knob and now everything's different, okay? Now, obviously, some of the settings in a trunking environment do not apply to a conventional environment, and likewise, some of the settings in a conventional environment don't apply to a trunking environment. So if we go to our trunking main menu, my favorite trunking main menu items are probably radio info. This is a must-have if you're doing OTAR, because this will let you know whether or not the radio has registered to the KMF. If it's never registered to the KMF, it's not going to work. It'll also provide you with the IP address if the radio is registered to the data server. And again, if it's not registered to the data server, it's never going to work. So it's great for troubleshooting OTAR to making sure things are going the way they are. Additionally, some specifics for trunking is our priority scan list edit. This allows our users to edit the scan list on the fly. And then we can also do site search. This is a great one to put under a menu. It allows the users to search for different sites if they're not happy with the site they're currently on. And then if you're using OTAR, a rekey request is a pretty good one as well. You can either put that in a menu or a button. I prefer to put it on a button. Each is to their own. Once we have selected the ones that we want in our menu, we can click and drag them to change the order, or we can simply select alphabetize to alphabetize them. Once we've spent all day configuring our menus, we have to go to the buttons. Because if you don't assign the menu to a button, they're never going to have access to it, and all that time will be wasted. So the first thing I do is I always make sure that I assign a button for the menu. The square button is my favorite for this. Now, if we have more than one zone in the radio, we have to make sure that we assign a zone select button so that we can change zones in our radio. I like to put the diamond for that. These are all listed in alphabetical order, so we can just scroll to the bottom and hit zone select. Or we can use our keys. So if I want to do site display, I can type in S. Oh, I made a classic mistake. I'm on the conventional setting and not the trunking setting. There we go. Press S, and there's site display. Site display is a good button to add to the radio because it allows the user to press the button and not only see what a site they're affiliated to, but also see the RSSI of that site, the receive strength signal indicator. So instead of just the martini glass in the upper left-hand corner with your growing bars, it will give you a dBm measurement. Now this measurement is in no way real time and is no way accurate enough to be called test equipment. But it gives you a really good ballpark of what you're looking at. The highest settings that the highest readings that you'll see will be greater than -88 dBm, and the lowest measurements you'll see will be less than -106 dBm. So it gives you a good idea of what kind of coverage area you're looking at. And then likewise, again, if you're doing encryption and OTAR, you may want to assign a button to do rekey request. Are there any questions about menus or buttons? Great. So let's talk about the display. So if I click on Global and then the P25 trunking tab here, I can now configure the display line. My favorite configuration, the top line is the zone label. The middle line is the channel label. And the bottom line is the unit ID. But another favorite one that I saw recently was under the alternate line, they added the radio name. Where is it? There it is. And then under the common tab, they checked disable display own unit ID. So what this does is when the radio is turned on, it's not going to display the unit ID of that radio. It's going to just display that radio's name. And then when someone keys up, it's going to flash between the name of that radio and the unit ID of the radio that's calling in. And again, if we've filled out our unit ID table, instead of showing the ID number, it will show the name of the radio coming in. And to configure the radio name, it's under the Global Common tab right here. Now, trunking systems like we've talked about are a bit more complex than conventional systems. And so sometimes you may need to do some troubleshooting, for example. And the easiest thing to do for troubleshooting is to turn roaming notifications on. With roaming notifications on, you will get information about whether or not the radio is registered to the system or been denied registration, whether or not the radio has affiliated to the system or been denied affiliation, and then also any location area registration if it's roaming from one site to another. This is not recommended to have turned on for your user because the radio is going to be constantly making beeps and bonks, and anytime a radio makes a noise, it's assumed that it's broken. But it's great for troubleshooting, so keep that in mind. So once we have our code plug dialed in exactly the way we want, it's time to write it into a radio. So the easiest way to write it into the radio is simply to have this window open here, and then under the ID, we just type in the ID of the radio. And then again, if we're doing OTAR, we'll need to go to Global Common and Keys and make sure that we update our OTAR RSI. Once we're happy with our settings, we can simply just hit Write Radio. It's going to write that trunking system to the radio. When it's complete, you'll see the radio is going to say powering off. At this time, you can turn the radio off and disconnect it. Connect new radio, turn that radio on. Change the ID number, change the RSI number, and hit Write. One of the major advantages of our programming software is that we can use one code plug and we can easily change it from different models. It's recommended that you save before you do this because when you change, your button configuration will not change, or it will clear itself out, I should say. So we can go up to Options, Radio Type, and I can change from a KNG to now a KNG2 code plug. Or I can go to Options, Radio Type, and now change it to a mobile code plug. And now this is a mobile code plug. That easy. That's all I have for you guys today. I'll open up the floor if there's any questions or if there's anything specifically you want to see again or something I didn't cover.
Hi, is it possible to ignore a system or a cell or ignore sites So in other words, to tell the radio, hey, never look at this site.
We can't say, it's a great question. Thanks, Nick. We can't say never. So if I go to my system and trunking tab here, I can configure a preferred site listing. So to do that, once I click on preferred sites, I can add a list, and then I can add sites to that list. So let's say I have a 4 site system, right? Let me do this better. Okay, so, and I want the radio to always use site number 1. So I can go to my site preference and I can say always use this one. And I can tell it I don't want it to use site number 4. So I can set that as least. Now that's not going to be never, it's just going to be least. It's going to not want to do that any at all.
Okay.
So we can't ever say never. The easiest way to say never, if you don't want a radio to ever affiliate to a site, the easiest way to do that is from the system level. So from the system level, your system administrator can say that certain talk groups aren't allowed on a site, or that certain radio IDs are not allowed on a site. And the big benefit from that is if your system administrator makes that change at a system level, and that at a later date, or if you're in the middle of an emergency and that radio has to have access to that site, you can easily go into the system level and make that change instead of having to reprogram a bunch of radios. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
Well,
we
and
have.
then let me go one step further. I'm sorry. So once we have our preferred site list, I forgot this part. We need to assign it to our talk group, because as you can see, we can have multiple site lists configured differently. So once we have that list configured, we can go to talk groups, and then where it says preferred, I can select the different lists to say that I want this one to do this one to do that, and so forth.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? That was a great question, Nick. Thanks. Any comments at all? Awesome. I won't take any more of your time then. Thanks for tuning in and helping out with the training. If you have any training that you need, or if you have any more information, feel free to reach out to your dealer or your RSM to ask, and we can continue to provide training for you guys on Tuesday. Sean, do you have a question?
No, I was just going to say thanks.
No worries, guys. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day. Please stay safe.
You too, man. Thanks.
Thank you.